Welcome back to Offworld, the show where we talk about all things space exploration and pop culture. I'm Ariel Waldman.
And I'm Norm Chan. And for today's episode, we're doing something a little timely because just this last week, season 4 of The Expanse dropped on Amazon.
Yeah, so we've watched just the first couple of episodes. So we feel like today's episode is like spoiler light. We go 2 episodes in, but we're not going to spoil the whole season for you because we haven't even seen it ourselves.
Yeah, and this is the first time it's on Amazon because it had 3 seasons on Sci-Fi. The story could have wrapped up there, of course, based on the novels. We've been covering that on Tested. Adam's been on set, of course. But it's a perfect time to jump into The Expanse, even if you've not watched the show before or haven't caught up, which is something I had to do to catch up quickly on this because they are literally exploring new worlds. We have a great guest this week, and we're going to dive into the world building of the show and have fun with it. Let's take a listen.
Okay, so The Expanse Season 4 just came out. I'm really excited to discuss this with both of you. We've got, obviously, Norm joining us today, but I'm really excited to have Violet Blue here on the show. Violet, please say a little bit about what you do and what you're doing related to The Expanse.
Thank you, Ariel. So I'm a writer by trade, and I've authored a couple dozen books. I just finished a giant book, and in between projects a little bit. But one of the things that I've been working on sort of secretly for the past year is a big sort of Expanse fan show with my co-creator, Scotland Simons, in Seattle. And it's been a blast. We're finally able to start to talk about it a little bit. So I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, and it's all about the prequel to essentially The Expanse is the idea, right?
Right. Well, the show that we started working on is called Flip and Burn. And the idea was we were really inspired by the Expanse RPG coming out. But we wanted to do something that was a combination of Expanse RPG, but also traditionally shot and traditionally set, with sort of the traditional way that you would shoot a show as a controlling element for our 4 main character players, who would then develop characters and develop scenes and sort of go through this world that we created with the Expanse RPG, which had added a really fun random element to the way that we could do story creation and character development. But what the great thing was that we were like, well, we don't really want it to run at the same time as The Expanse. This is a fan show. We kind of got obsessed with the idea of doing something before the world of The Expanse, something roughly around 10 to 15 years before the show started. And when I started working on writing it, I realized that there were a lot of really, really interesting things about Arrow Station that were questions left unanswered. So what we decided to do was base the majority of our story on Arrow Station.
Yeah, and for people who are not as well versed with The Expanse, Eros is the asteroid, one of the asteroids that people are living within, that seems to have a really rich culture to it that isn't fully expanded upon. So that's really awesome. So getting into season 4, we've all watched a couple of episodes into season 4, which is so exciting. It's now up on Amazon, and I don't know, what did you generally think about the world building and everything sort of that we saw in the first couple of episodes?
I mean, it's a whole new world, right? I mean, that's the big thing, and it's fresh. Mm-hmm. So the show and the books, when you started it, it was it's like what you said, it was ripe for so much backstory, things that spark the imaginations of readers and viewers, what was it like to get on Eros or Mars in the early days. Now you can finally get a sense of that. And guess what? It's just as messy as
absolutely.
you imagine it would be in the universe of The Expanse and all the geopolitics.
Yeah.
I love how when we first start out, we sort of get to visit all the characters. And we sort of get to figure out okay, here's what happened to this character, and here's what happened to Clarissa Mao, and what's going on with the Rocinante. And I feel like that's really neat, but also you kind of get this snapshot of where these characters ended up after their intense conflicts and their journeys. And I think, especially because I'm so obsessed with Belter culture, I find it really fascinating that now Belters are sort of stuck in this position of policing the ring and still sort of under the thumb of the Inners. And you get this overall vibe of the more things change, the more they stay the same. And you can kind of feel that in the characters in the way that they're sort of okay.
Yeah, and to catch people up, so end of season 3, essentially they go into the ring. A lot of conflicts ensue, and then sort of ends with multiple rings opening up inside of the ring, and no one really knows like what that's about. And so season 4 really kicks off with kind of taking like a breath and a pause and saying, okay, yeah, where did these characters end up? Where have they been since that conflict arose? And sort of everyone went back to their home. You have Bobby who went back to Mars. You have Holden who went back to Earth. And you see everyone, kind of chilling out a little bit before then they start discovering that these rings that opened up are really portals into other exoplanets and other worlds that are thought to be habitable, just readily habitable, as opposed to needing to terraform them like Mars or something. And so then, it as I guess is very well suited for the Expanse, we are going from the solar system to expanding into seeing our first exoplanet and getting to see that world. And that world, at least that we're exploring initially, is Illis, which they say is the sibling of Ganymede. And on Illis, we see metal life forms, and we see this weird, mysterious tower that might be part of the protomolecule, but we don't really know. But Violet, you rightfully brought up like the whole like balance of power. Essentially, the rings are still being policed. They don't the UN, the Earth, the Inners essentially want to not just let anyone through these rings because they don't want just chaos to ensue.
Right.
And the Belters have got this, truce with the UN to try and uphold that, and they're trying to like uphold this truce by helping police for the UN. But
I think they can tell they're being used. It's typical, right? The Belters caught in the middle, and I think it's funny. One of the characters that really kind of caught me in terms of like their character arc was Ashford, because when we see Ashford, he's still in his uniform. And I don't know if you remember the, drummer making fun of him for wearing the uniform and him saying that Anderson Dawes, give him a hard time about it too. But for Ashford, that uniform really represented something. It represented bringing Belters together in unity and showing a united front. And now it's basically almost like a mall cop uniform, He's like, whoop, whoop, there's the police, and you can tell that it's kind of breaking him. And you can tell that, because the actor is so brilliant, just by what's going on with the expressions and the things that he's dealing with. And he's dealing with, people that he has tried to unite coming at him and being angry at him and defiant and wanting to topple this sort of new order. And I think that translates really interestingly, too, with what we see when they land on the planet, because we suddenly basically have 3 different factions that all have 3 different goals, and we get to see the different approaches in the way that they sort of encounter each other. And the crew, the Rocinante, I think is probably their approach to me is the most interesting. And you really see in that moment when Naomi Nagata takes her first walk out onto the planet and she falls, and Holden holds everybody back from going to pick her up and going to save her. And that's the vibe I think that we're getting of the Rocinante crew as space explorers, rather than intervening without permission. He's, Holden is like, no, wait for her to ask for help. Like, don't force help. And it's a very consent-based approach to dealing with this whole new situation, which is, of course, the opposite of what's going on with the scientists. And, the Belters, as usual, are just reacting.
And her specifically, that whole journey she has to take throughout that first episode to prepare her body to walk on the planet, right? And
first time being in essentially 1G for someone who's lived in the asteroid belt.
But she has the kind of emotional and like the mental, like the motivation to go through that, which is not easy. But it goes to why, like her motive, why does she want to do that, and the connection that she feels with, these refugees and these people.
Yeah, I loved the way this was shot. I think if you haven't watched these episodes yet and you're listening, definitely like get like a big screen TV, because they shoot this in like super widescreen when they arrive on this exoplanet. And I feel like it's a way of essentially showing a Belter's first time on a planet with wide horizons, and and she's spent her whole life in very small confined spaces, and so the way they shot it is super widescreen, sort of super cast in a blue, sort of color to sort of denote that maybe it's a different planet. But they shot it in a quarry. I can't pronounce that word. Quarry. One of those. Yeah. They shot it in like this really interesting place that was like, I guess like 90 minutes out of Toronto or something. That was kind of otherworldly. And I feel like they wanted a lot of emphasis on, okay, we're now on a planet that we've never seen before, which is just really beautiful. Another aspect of the power balance that I wanted to get into, though, is I feel like season 4 really actually opens up a whole new power structure and sort of corporate power, because you see I think it's the RCE go to the planet, and they're wanting to mine the planet, and they're wanting to kick off the refugees and people who have immigrated to the planet so that they can mine it for lithium, I believe. And so then we see sort of the UN utilizing corporate power as a way of like kicking out immigrants. And I feel like corporations haven't come up as strongly in the previous seasons as it does here.
I think they've always been at play in the background, though, and I think it's kind of interesting, too, because we haven't really been informed that much also about how much corporate control there is in politics, in Mars politics and in UN politics. But obviously it's there because Jules-Pierre Mao got away with so much, and he was controlling so many parts of politics. So
I mean, it's the number one thing they mentioned when they first talk about the planet. It's not about the terrain. It's rich in lithium, and it can be used for jobs. And, it's not about the scientific research and figure out what's all the unexpected dangers or life forms there. It's about, let's get people there now, because this is what people need right now, these constituents.
Yeah, I mean, Norm, what did you think about just generally like watching these first couple of episodes of what were sort of the hooks for you of the things that you wanted to like learn more about or hope that you see more of in season 4?
I mean, definitely the sense of identity, right? What it means for these people to have identity on the planet now versus where they came from. Because you said like the show opens up with everyone going home, and home for the Expanse is like one of the big conceits of the show. Home is not just Earth, it's Mars, it's the belt, and now there's a whole new type of home. And so for that to develop, where will people feel like they feel like they're at home in this place, and how that develops. And it is a big cheat because you can get to an exoplanet, right, just through a ring. And for a show that's all about hard science fiction and distances, and the fact that you can't do a live call with someone unless you're really close to them, right, on a ship, right, you can have a planet that's fresh. And so that's really exciting. Yeah.
I mean, so I don't know, there's so much to dig into. For me, the stuff that I got really excited about was there was a little bit more elaboration of sort of how Mars came to be, about the fact that it took many generations to terraform Mars, and the contrast of that with the exoplanets that are just ready to go. You just, land on them and it's like, fully habitable, because they were also talking about I think like the clouds on Mars and developing those over time, and having a magnetosphere, that they got like a magnetosphere working, and those little like details were really like informative, I felt, for like better world building. Violet, like when you were watching these episodes, like were you picking up on like little things that you felt were informative for building out the prequels fully? Or
Absolutely. I mean, there've been little bits and pieces sort of sprinkled throughout the whole, everything that we've seen so far in all of the seasons. In the first episodes, the things that got me really interested about Eros were things like, Earther Ehrenreich saying that it was the murder capital of the universe, basically. And, a cop on Ceres saying that it was a garbage dump. But then when our characters got to Eros, like right before it ended, we could see it was in decline. And, the Avasarala spy was saying, you should have seen this place. It was the jewel of the belt. And considering now that we know, that there have been generations on Mars. So obviously we have generations in the belt. And so there were generations on Eros as well. And so that, goes into some of the questions that I'm building, which is, what were their traditions? What were the stories they told their children? What were their rituals around death and memory, and how did they ascribe meaning, and what does it look like when belters actually can plant something and stay there for a little bit? which is something that they've been systematically and categorically denied the entire time that they've been out there. So it's going to be really exciting for me to see, because it's like, okay, we're taking belters, and they're making a home. They're taking a stand. They actually want to stay put. What does that look like? I also find it really fascinating that not everyone thinks it's a good idea in the belt. Drummer doesn't think they should be there, and that I think is very fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, there's some underlying context there, I feel, of like, perhaps because, the thing that opened up all these planets is the protomolecule. And that's actually something that we haven't talked about, which is a whole part of like season 4, which is like, what is the protomolecule? Like, what does it want? What are its motivations? Does it have one motivation? Is it one thing? I mean, mostly it seems like no, but it's hard to really suss out, like with this protomolecule and like the permeations of it in Miller and everything. If it's sort of like wanting to help Holden and humans, or if it's wanting to hurt them, or if it's wanting to take them over, or if it just doesn't really care.
Right.
I don't know. Like, there's so much to dig into with the protomolecule. Yeah.
I also feel like that's part of the show that I'm okay if they let that play a long game, because like that's the MacGuffin. It was like the genesis for
Right.
for the 3 seasons, and now you have it has literally opened these new worlds. Like I would be okay if that didn't become a regular ongoing concern for them, because there's already so much in just the personal relationships and the political relationships to drive the story that I really feel like is the heart of the show this season. That, I mean, yes, it's questions will need to be answered. They've laid some seeds for those questions, but I'm okay if that lingers a little longer.
It's exciting to talk about the questions, though.
Yeah.
I mean, I like that, you're saying, does this thing have a purpose? Is it sinister? Is it amoral? Does it care? And then, when we get to Ilus, we see it has structures.
Yeah.
And it has form. And what is that? Like, what is it going to do? And these structures, they look incredible. I mean, just the set design and the colors and the cinematography on this season is mind-blowing. But these structures are just, they look so Gigeresque, but they also look like thorns coming out of the planet. And you're just like,
Yeah.
are these churches? Are they machines? Is this machinery? Like, what is going on here?
I mean, I certainly hope they start revealing more about it, because essentially they've placed Holden and his crew as essentially protomolecule hunters at this point, where it's like, if there wasn't this weird structure on this exoplanet, they wouldn't have been sent to the exoplanet. They would have let the corporate power battle out the immigrants, and however that would have gone. But I feel like, yeah, Holden and crew are there to be like, well, what is it doing there? Is it going to hurt these people? Is it going to help them? And, why are all these rings opened anyway? Is it a trap?
Right.
Yeah, there's so much of it. And, I mean, one of the fun episodes from a previous season was when the protomolecule got, sent into Venus, and then, one of the ships near Venus sort of went down with it and exploded, and our own Adam Savage was part of that ship that exploded. So yeah, it's this weird thing where they're sort of both cooperating with the protomolecule and also not exactly trusting it either. So yeah, I don't even know where it'll go from there, but obviously, it's this kind of character unto itself that is extremely mysterious, almost like a no-face in a way.
It becomes an allegory for the colonization, right? This season is about colonization.
Absolutely.
And all those stories about colonization, whether it's in science fiction or in our history, you don't colonize without considering what's already there, and whether it's life, whether it's civilization, and this has got to be some form of that, and represents a danger. Probably initially, but it's about the lack of understanding and the rush to do it, which we see, that's been the motivating factor for all these factions.
Yeah. Well, and some of the hard science fiction also that I really like about this new season is they get really into the gravity drugs for Naomi to go through in order to be able to tolerate 1G. She's not just exercising a ton, but she's taking like what seem to be these extremely painful gravity drugs that nearly knock her out every time. And and she's like hiding from everyone else just how intense these drugs are.
Right.
And I don't know, it's interesting because this is what I love about The Expanse. They really break down like, okay, you know, whether or not it's realistic that you would have gravity drugs, imagine that they would be this painful. Would you actually go through with it? And I mean, from what I saw, I wouldn't.
I love that idea. Also made me think of what the reverse of that would be, right? I guess the conceit is, would you undergo some type of physiological transformation to yourself voluntarily to make your life as a space explorer easier? And whether that's from someone going from low microgravity to 1G environments or higher than 1G environments, or even, you know, in the future, if there was a way for astronauts to change their bodies to make life easier in space, is that a path forward in real life, right? Because right now, the astronauts do have, like, our bodies are not made to live in there.
Not yet.
Yeah, right. Or because we don't have the generations of changing our actual bodies.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, were there any like other, I guess, new characters or new widgetry that you saw in this season that like you particularly liked that was like new for this season?
I just one of my favorite Canadian actors is on the planet among the Belters. It's Chris Holden-Reed, and I was really excited to see him. So,
well, what role does he play?
He's one of the sort of higher up in the Belter colonists, and it's just fantastic. I mean, some of the new actors that they've brought in are powerhouse actors for sure.
Yeah, it's always nice to like see the cast expand and sort of wonder like who's going to be recurring and not. I personally really liked the fact that the corporate crew that was going down to the planet had a planetary biologist with them.
Yes.
And so it's like they get attacked by, you know, these are spoilers, but we've already warned people, you know, they get attacked by these like metal life forms and they're like, that can't be a life form. That's like pure metal. And she's like, oh, a way to think like an earthling, essentially. Like, you know, she's like, I do planetary biology. Like, this is totally normal. And like, it's cool to have sort of a scientist actually like with everyone and be explaining like, oh yeah, I go to planets all the time and find weird stuff.
Right.
That was like really
That's
cool.
really fun where there's the banter they have.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's so casual. And that's really the future they imagine, where space travel can be relatively routine. Like, it's like everyone's, and then so the reminders of how dangerous space is, even as you're getting onto a planet or a 1G environment. That's what's shocking to them, and that's fun to watch.
Well, and just as dangerous are all the assumptions that people make. You know, I think the same character you were talking about later makes a reference to Naomi, assuming that she's an Earther. And Naomi has a great comeback that's basically like, okay, colonizer, you know. And it's these kind of assumptions that we start to see really come to the boiling point in the conflicts that are starting to begin in the settlement.
Yeah. Well, I mean, gosh, there's so much to dive into, and yeah, we've only started just at the beginning of season 4, but it's really exciting. I'm definitely going to be binge watching the entire season very shortly. So my final question, I guess, is, you know, The Expanse. We're out to exoplanets now, but we've seen Ganymede, we've seen Mars, we've seen Eros. I guess, you know, since I know that your favorite is Eros, if you had to choose anywhere else to live in the Expanse world other than Eros, what's your next favorite place?
Ceres. I tend to be attracted to the stations, but I'm also very attracted to Belter culture. I mean, I don't mean to, you know, like diss on Mars or or Earth or anything like that, although I am pretty curious to see what exactly is going on in the social structure on Earth right now. Because clearly, at least we understand from the previous seasons, we've got, you know, people living in communes on beautiful plots of land like Holden's family, but then a whole lot of slums and, you know, people literally living in the gutters. So that's kind of interesting to me. But yeah, no, I would probably choose Ceres Station. I'd be curious to see Titan as well.
Oh yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, did they actually show Titan in any of? I don't know. If
I don't recall.
It. But yeah, I mean, why not? It would
right.
be awesome. Norm, do you have a favorite?
The moon.
The moon.
Oh, Luna. Yeah.
Yeah. I might go, even though I might not want to stay there very long. What I saw of Ganymede, of just like the greenhouses that they had on Ganymede, was just
Beautiful.
like really beautiful. Like maybe not a place I'd want to spend my whole life, but I'd
Yeah.
definitely be interested to check out what that would be like. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
So clearly there's a lot of mystery and a lot more to unravel with the show. I've read some reviews, people who've already watched, most of the season that Amazon sent out screeners say a lot. It ramps up. So I'm looking very forward to that.
Yeah, it ramps up both in storyline, but also as we discuss, the cinematography is just absolutely beautiful. And it's just amazing to see that clearly they did get a little bit more budget to do different things and to sort of like set the scene more and really give you the feeling that The Expanse is properly expanding into new territory.
Mm-hmm. And if you're new to the idea of The Expanse, we've pushed before, it is a show that tries to be true to the physics of space, a hard science fiction show, one of the few hard science fiction shows on TV or streaming right now. And while, yes, they do have these kind of MacGuffin-like devices that allow them to go to like extraordinary places, there's so much that if you're a science fan or space geek, you will appreciate about this show.
Yeah, it's really refreshing, not only from a physics point of view, but also from an astrobiology point of view. You have a lot of different sciences that are intersecting in The Expanse, and also, medical devices that they get to explore, that what we talked about. So I feel like if you're a science geek and you haven't yet dove into The Expanse, there's a rich, rich environment for you to explore with The Expanse.
And of course, we'll be covering more shows. There's so many shows in this coming year, and movies, of course, science fiction and space movies. There's Star Trek Picard coming out in just a month's time. So we'll definitely be covering that on Offworld. Be sure to subscribe to the channel or to the podcast. You can just go to tested.com/Offworld if you want to listen to the audio. Let us know what you think about season 4 of The Expanse, and we may come back and revisit it once we feel like people have had a chance to digest the season.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.